Welcome, everybody. Very excited that we have Tristan Handy here with us, CEO and founder of DBT. Just a real quick intro about Tristan. He is someone out of a Philadelphia startup, started formerly as Fishtown Analytics. He's been pioneering the modern analytics engineering space. DBT is currently used by over 5,000 companies to organize, catalog, and distill knowledge from the data in their data warehouses, including companies like JetBlue, HubSpot, of course, us, GitLab, and the ACLU are a few. Tristan has been working in the data space for 2 decades in both in-house and consulting roles for large enterprises and even small startups. Tristan, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you for being here and sharing some time with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So I thought I'd kick it off with just one question that I thought was really interesting that I don't even know if you thought about it when you made the comment, but during a coffee chat, you mentioned one of the DBT values, and values at GitLab are very important and we live by them every day. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is you had a value that says, "Come as you are." Can you provide a little insight on like how that came about and how you lived that value?
Yeah. Oh, geez. So the text of the value is "We are human," and it often does translate into "Bring your whole self to work" or "Come as you are." We were talking about it because we were talking about virtual backgrounds and how we often like to share the mess that is present in our lives, because that's just that's the state of the world. Most of our values were actually penned back before the corporate entity was even formed, but this one is one that's been on an evolution, and it's an evolution that I think is reflected like our own understanding of like how we wanted to show up at work. There's been a lot of decisions that folks have made as the world has changed over the past 5 years, and how much of yourself do you bring to work, especially and I don't think I'm saying anything particularly surprising, but the world's been an interesting place over the past 5 years, and we have to choose like how much of that do we show up with and share with our colleagues, and how much of that do we try to like leave at home. It's not always easy to show up and like bring all of that to work with you, but I think that it creates a pretty unique environment here, and we've learned how to have hard conversations, and sometimes conversations that like folks are not used to having at work. I hope that does at least a reasonable job of answering that.
Yeah, for me it does. I love that value, and I'm always interested to see how other companies really find that identity and in how they operate. And I think that particular value certainly aligns very much to how GitLab operates. So thank you for sharing that. Let's jump into Q&A, and I think I think that's Rob Parker. Rob Parker, I think you have the first question. Want a voiceover?
Sure. Tristan, thanks for joining. It's fantastic to see you and have you present, so appreciate your time. I've been, and my team has been, a DBT customer for a number of years, and it predates my my start here at GitLab, but it's a very powerful technology. Coming to GitLab was my first experience with it, and I can see the community and your customer base just growing and growing and growing. So congratulations. How did you come about DBT? Like, what tools did you use before DBT? What were some of your tools that you grew sick and tired of, or examples that led you to creating DBT?
It's a very big question. I'll try to keep my answer to a reasonably confined set. Otherwise, we'll spend the whole time on this. The actual like specific journey that I was like, I need a thing that looks exactly like DBT involved Redshift and Mode, a little bit of Looker thrown in there, and I felt that this hole. I kept writing a bunch of SQL code. I kept writing Looker does its own kind of data transformation. I felt like there was a hole in the workflow, and rather than writing this like 150 line long query in mode, I wanted to like work more like a software engineer and break this into like distinct chunks of logic. And I had used a product much earlier in my career called Oracle Warehouse Builder. OWB was like early 2000s, and you'd start with a blank canvas and you would like draw, or you would like put these like icons on you would create a flow, you would drag lines between them. And it was a product of that era, and in many ways a suboptimal experience. And so I was like, okay, I need that thing. I need like the thing to do that job, but how should it look today? And the two inspirations that I took were one, Terraform, and two, Ruby on Rails. I had never used Terraform before, but my co-founder Connor was just getting into Terraform in 2015, 2016, and he showed me how it worked, and I was like, that's like literally the exact user experience that I want. And then I was thinking about, I'm not a very good like software engineer, but I have done some web development, and a lot of that's been in Ruby on Rails. And I was like, I want like a framework like that kind of gives me a kind of a sense of how to work, because I want to be able to write code and express the business logic, but I don't want to think about like how a request flows from like, the beginning to the end of the web stack. So that's kind of like where all the soup of ideas came from.
That's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing. Dennis, looks like you're up next.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I was wondering, is it harder to grow an open source product compared to a traditional project, and especially in the data world? Because in my opinion, the data world is using quite some proprietary software currently. So how is the data world responding to open source software here?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that here's the like really boring answer. In some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. And I think that you're like 100% absolutely right that data historically has been primarily proprietary products. I do think that like, especially data infra is moving towards being more open source focused, especially companies that are founded now or within the past year or two. So that makes me happy just as a user. Like I think that is just like good for the world. Okay, the things that are easier because of open source, I think for a proprietary software company, you have to actually set out with a very specific intention of like building a proprietary software company. Like you don't kind of like accidentally build a proprietary software company. And with open source, you have a lot more flexibility. We started out as a consultancy. DBT was an internal productivity tool that we heavily used on all of our projects. And it kind of developed a community around it and took on a life of its own. And so we decided 3 years in to fundraise behind it and support the community more fully. And I don't think you can have that journey as a proprietary software company. You can't just like magically develop a community around something that people have to pay for. And so I've really found the open source journey to be like much more aligned with the way that I like to think very iteratively about the formation process. It's like de-risked a lot of it for us. But the hard part, as my guess is that a lot of you folks are very well aware of, is that you don't get to sell the core thing. Like you have to like develop this core thing, and people have to care about that and love it, and then you have to like build another thing or multiple other things, and those have to be independently good enough that people will pay for them. Because if you show up on a sales call and you're just like, hey, DBT is awesome, why don't you pay us for it? They're like, no, we can just get that for free. So I think that we like all open source companies have to be doing multiple things all at the same time, and it feels a little chaotic and feels like there's never enough resources to actually make everyone happy. You folks are way further along this journey, so maybe you have achieved that state of nirvana where you actually have enough software engineers, but we always feel like we need double or quadruple the number of product people and engineering people that we need.
Cool, thanks a lot. Over to Sushma.
I don't think Sushma's on, so we'll voice over her question.
Yeah, sorry.
What next big releases or features in DBT should we be looking forward to?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that we had our annual user conference in December. We launched our 1.0. I mean, we were pre 1.0 for 5+ years. So
Everyone, go ahead, Tristan.
Let me try to recover my train of thought. Oh, we finally 1.0'd after 5.5 years. And so it's this big milestone. It's like we get to figure out, okay, what do we want to tackle next? Like the core DBT experience is performant. It is stable. We like understand the user-facing API, and so one of the big ways in which we want to push things forwards is we want. If you think of DBT as essentially a programming framework or a language or a compiler, DBT takes a templating layer on top of SQL and then allows you to express a bunch of things in that templating layer that you couldn't express in raw SQL. And then it compiles all that down into raw SQL and runs it against databases. And so right now, the technical underpinnings of that compiler are very suitable for a certain set of workloads, specifically batch-based data transformation. So that's generally how people use DBT today. They write a bunch of pipelines, and then they say, okay, DBT, go make it so. And DBT in batch will run all of this stuff. That's a big chunk of data workloads that exist in the world today, but it's by no means all of them. And so there's this powerful community-built programming construct that can only be used by a certain set of workloads. And what we want to do is bring these same programming constructs into other data workloads. And so the first one that we are looking at is real-time metrics, query time metrics. And so if you think about, okay, there's a certain set of like data preparation, you like build a customers table. You want a really clean customers table so you can go analyze it. The second type of workload that we're moving into, metrics, is rather than like preparing the customers table ahead of time, you say like, okay, we've got 10 metrics. They're all built on top of the customers table. And I might want to, and maybe one of those metrics is simply just customer count. And I want to be able to access this customer count metric in all the different BI tools that I use. Maybe I use parts of the business use Tableau, parts of it use Jupyter Notebooks, parts use, whatever. And I want to make sure that customer count is a metric that is available in all of them. And I want to make sure every time I select customer count, it is using literally the exact same SQL to fetch that count from the database every time. So you can be 100% confident that everybody's using the same definitions for these metrics. And so what DBT is going to do is it's going to become this proxy server where you can actually from your BI tool say like, hey, I want the customer count metric. And in this proxy server layer, DBT will actually intercept that query. It will compile it to raw SQL to get the customer count. It will ask the database that and we'll return it. So whereas DBT previously did not participate in query time analytics, you will now be able to use these same kind of programming constructs in your BI layer as well. DBT is not going to be a BI tool. It was one of the you make these agreements, you sign in blood with your co-founders when you start a company. One of the agreements that Drew and Connor and I made was, we're not building a BI tool. We've done that before in our lives, not doing it again. But that doesn't mean that we can't empower BI and analytics workflows with data infrastructure. And so that's what we're trying to do with this next phase.
Thanks, Tristan. Roberta, you have the next question?
Yes, and it actually fits perfectly with what has been just discussed, because DBT currently, so DBT as a tool has access to Snowflake, to data flows. Do you have any plans to move into, to expand into data observability?
Let me just ask her real quick. Okay, I'm looking at your title, Senior Data Engineer. So observability is probably something you care a lot about. Makes sense. Let me answer that question from like a metadata perspective more broadly, because I think of observability as like a use case within this like broader metadata problem space. I think it's really hard to separate out some of these problems and say, this observability is distinct from all of these other problems. And the same would be true of data catalog. Same would be true of testing or data quality. So when I'm, I still, my BI tool of choice is Mode. I don't want to make an argument that's better than any other, just like that's my habit. And so when I am like doing an analytical, like going through the analytical process, I'm primarily living inside of the Mode interface to do that. And what I do not want is I do not want to jump to 4 different experiences to try to navigate a data catalog, a data observability solution, a data quality. So that doesn't make any sense from like a user perspective. I think that the reason that this is like a category right now, that like companies are getting started and talking about data observability, it is less about that like users want a separate data observability solution. It's more that if you're a company and you say like, hey, there's a problem with observability, you're like, well, I'll build a tool and it'll be separate. I think that the way that we want to see this go, and I do believe that DBT will be a part of this solution, is that you're right, we have access to a ton of information, ton of metadata. We want to solve this via APIs. And if you think about how did Twilio solve messaging? They didn't do it by like creating a marketing automation tool and they might have something in that front now, but that's not how they like went about solving that fundamentally. They said, okay, there's a million different reasons that people might want to send messages. We're going to just like make a set of APIs that enable people to do that in whatever context they're in. And so when we think of observability or cataloging or quality or other things like this, we think, okay, let's make sure that we have the whole universe of information available, and then let's like create APIs that BI tools that other, your data apps that you build internally can very easily access all of that metadata and give you a cohesive single experience to say like, yeah, I want to discover a new data set. I'm going to do it inside of Mode. I'm going to look up, whether that's been built recently, whether it's of quality, et cetera. So I do think that there is a role for DBT to play there, but I don't, I want to be careful that like, we do not see ourselves as like building a data observability competitive solution.
Thanks. The next one, I think, is Radovan.
Yeah. Hello, Tristan. Radovan, senior data engineer, and thanks for creating a great product. Really make our life easier and nicer. And what I'm interested for, actually, I have two questions. The first one, in how you feel about and how you manage to drive versions and releases. I know you have paid, free, also a lot of plugins. Do you feel it's overwhelming for you and your team, and how you decide what will go in which version, what will stay for free, what we need to pay eventually, and things like that? What's your opinion on that?
I'm trying to decompose that into different questions. So you're right. There's some different surface area. We have DBT packages. So like we maintain the most widely used DBT package out there called DBT Utils. That's in use by maybe 40% of all DBT projects. Then we have the adapters that connect to the databases, and those have recently gotten split out into their own repositories, and we maintain like the 4 or 5 biggest ones, and then the community does the rest. As a percentage of like total effort, those two things are like reasonably small. They're not large ticket items. So then it comes to really like DBT Core and DBT Cloud. These are like the two main code bases that we maintain. And it turns out that, and you probably all are, I'm preaching to the choir here. It turns out that it's actually, there's more work involved in building and hosting, maintaining a cloud service than there is in a piece of downloaded open source software. There's a bunch of like, when you put all of the operations and maintenance in the hands of the users, then there's just like a lot of stuff that you don't have to think about. So we end up spending more engineering bandwidth on cloud. But the choices that a lot of open source, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of open source founders. And I get the sense that this question, like what do we put in free versus paid or open versus closed, that comes up a lot and is like, can be a contentious issue. I think that the way that we have architected things from the ground up makes that a little bit less of a challenge for us. And it's not because I think that we're like so clever and we did it all right. I think it's more that we are a fairly recently started open source company. If we got to watch Confluent and Databricks and Elastic and you folks, like we got to watch all these companies make these decisions, and especially a lot of our thinking gets 2018 or 2019 that like all the big relicensing happened. Anyway, there are very clear scopes for core versus cloud for us. Core does two things. It does language and it does database connectivity. So if you want to create a programming construct, it's always going to go in core 100% of the time. If you want to do something relative to like how DBT interacts with databases, it's always going to into core. If you want to do something that requires statefulness or persistence or just all the things that cloud services are good at, or user experience, those are kind of the two categories, like persistence and user experience, then it's going to go into cloud. And then cloud actually consumes core. And so by building core functionality, it rolls out into the commercial product. So this is like worked pretty well for us, for our community. We've never really had anybody, that's a big statement, but I'm not aware of the kinds of tension that have run through some open source communities in the past about how this line is drawn. So I think that that's an answer that we're going to be pretty consistent with.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I have one more question. It's just a follow-up on observability tools. And I know DBT, it stands for transformation or transformer tool for now. Do you have any plans to catch up that wave to provide full ETL solution like OBII, as you mentioned, like Talent or something like that? Or you want to stay only in this niche in transformation world? Or you want to create some strategic partnership with third parties to provide the full set of functionality for ETL processing or ELT processing?
With the main things that we don't do being like data ingestion, is that what you mean?
Like to extend your current functionality. For now, you provide transformation of the data. Do you have any plans to do extraction or loading data or some storage, things like that? Full stack, let's say, ETL processing.
Good question, and I love that this is being archived on YouTube forever, because I'll give you my best answer today, and then in 10 years somebody will point back to this and be like, you said that. There are like real differences between the engineering task of moving data around versus building a compiler. We have an organization that like knows how to build compilers, knows how to build user experiences around IDEs, around that kind of stuff. We would have done a lot of things very differently if the problem that we wanted to solve was, how do we move data from Salesforce to Snowflake or whatever. And I honestly don't, if I, had a vision tonight and woke up tomorrow and was like, the future is data, extract and load. I actually don't think we'd be particularly good at that as an organization. That's just like not how we're wired. And so I think that one of the reasons that I'm most bullish on quote unquote the modern data stack is that we have reasonably clear layers and areas of responsibility where different solutions interface nicely together, and we all partner pretty well, and we co-sell pretty well. So I hope that that's the way that things continue to be for a long time. Now, in the fullness of time, will there be, some acquisition wave where, Snowflake buys every company that has data in its name? I have no idea. We will see where things go, but we have no, the things that we think about are like, how do we take the DBT compiler and the DBT experience and like bring it to more use cases, as opposed to like, how do we do more things that would have traditionally been considered part of an ETL solution?
Great. Thanks a lot. Very great answers.
Chris, you're up.
Next. Yeah. Hi, Tristan. I was just wondering if there was any more details about which BI partners you were working with around the metrics layer. It'd be quite useful to see any more information about that.
I don't think that I am at liberty to share more information on that right this second. I am very excited that it's funny, you can like read into who kind of got the avalanche started. There's been a lot of interest in the metrics layer in the past, like 8 months. And you can map a lot of that interest back to a newsletter that was published by Ben Stansel sometime over the summer. I forget. I think he just called it the metrics layer. I forget. But he writes at ben.substack.com. He's a co-founder of Mode Analytics. So I won't tell you exactly who is going to be a launch partner, but I will say that Ben has been very formative in his public writing, and you can take some assumptions from that.
Thank you.
Hey, Jerome, you're up next.
Yeah, I think I'm next. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for taking your time today, Tristan. My question was just, I guess, maybe taking a slightly different angle and thinking about yourself. I did a little bit of LinkedIn snooping, but yeah, you kind of describe
this
yourself.
This question is funny.
But yeah, I think for me, as someone who's quite analytical, who's been, moving towards more management role in the last few years, it's something that I'm kind of always trying to like get the right balance between thinking about stuff and executing. I was just wondering if you've got any tips on how you get a good balance.
It's such an interesting question. I am really worried anytime people ask questions that like have me giving kind of broad advice that my sample set of one is not actually a great way to base advice on. I will say that I was a video game player when I was in my like young years, and I played all kinds of different games until I was, I don't know, like 12 or something, and Warcraft 2 came out, and it's this category called a real-time strategy game. And literally the minute that I played Warcraft 2, I was like, I have no interest in ever playing another video game. Like, I'm only ever going to play real-time strategy games. And because they are essentially like this combination of both strategy and execution. You kind of start off with this blank slate. It's like you can do literally whatever you want, and you get this really satisfying answer at the end of the day. Like, either you won or you lost the game, and so your strategic and execution decisions were like good or bad. Anyway, it's like it happens to be the way that my brain works, and I like love those two things. The things that people who have brains like mine, the things that I think oftentimes we're not good at are things that, you know, you have to then like tack on later in life. So for me, I've had to like learn how to be a lot more intellectually humble. I've had to learn how to like see people, like truly listen to people better, how to like have hard conversation. There's like this whole other skill set that I like really have had to work very hard at. But I don't know that there's like some magic trick about like, I think that if you want to be good at execution and good at strategic thinking, then it's like put yourself in positions where like you can exercise those muscles and like continue going at it. I didn't have a playbook. I just like continued to take roles where I had enough scope where I could, and sometimes in order to get enough scope, you have to join like some tiny little company that probably will fail. You have to be okay with that. Like, I've had multiple companies that I work for fail, and it's like, okay, well, I learned a lot in the process. Hopefully that set of word salad was like at least like slightly useful.
Yeah, that was interesting. Thank you. And I think I've got the next one actually. I think I've kind of been collating some answers as you've been talking, but the question was, what kind of high level factors would you attribute to the success of DBT to date?
It's another one of those trying to determine causality. I kind of teased this at the beginning of the conversation. Open source gives you optionality. Like, you don't have to be all in to starting a venture funded business, and you know, like the only possible outcome that is successful is $1 billion, you know, exit. Or I think that the biggest thing that has enabled us to be successful is to not try to answer the question, like, what does this thing actually want to be, until we had more data. And so I think that as a founder, one strategy that is widely underemployed is optimizing for optionality, like creating as many possible ways that success could look as possible. And that requires you to be flexible and you know, forces you to live with uncertainty. And a lot of people hate that. A lot of people are just like, I want success to look like that, and I'm going to run at it as hard as I can, even if that means that I like give myself a concussion running into the wall along the way. But I think that is really a huge one. And then like here's the other one, and this is so overplayed, and I apologize for even saying it, but I think if you're going to be a community-based business, you actually have to care about the community. I know that's like, it's such a stupidly obvious thing, but people get it wrong all the time. Like, people start a company and then they're like, how am I going to hit my growth targets next year? Let's start a community. And that's like exactly the wrong order of operations. It's like, step one, do you think about the community as like a first class thing? So like the community matters to me more than the commercial product. So like our last value is values are more important than success. And the way that I translate that to people is the project is more important than the company. The company actually exists to support the project as opposed to the other way around. And that just is like something that you as a founder need to either believe or not believe. And if you believe it, you have to make sure that you hire people and that believe it too, and that you make sure to resist the temptations to pull you in the other direction.
Cool. Really interesting. Thank you.
By the way, Tristan, I really like that. I think there's a little sound bite there that you should do a little bit there. Well done. Rob, go ahead.
Hey, Tristan, just sharing a fun fact here. We have published a lot of great content in our handbook. GitLab's handbook is one of our superpowers, I believe, in helping to spread knowledge and information just around the world about how
we use it all the time. We use your handbook constantly.
And so do your customers. Your customers use our DBT handbook page. Actually, it's the 12th most popular page in our handbook, the DBT guide.
That is really something. Okay, great.
So just sharing that fun fact. And it's actually funny, across the data team, we receive regular requests and pings and updates and thanks about that content, the DBT.
That's really neat. Hopefully it's provides some good hiring opportunity for you folks. I will, you can scrub this part out if I'm not supposed to say this, but I'm looking at the screenshot that you shared. The DBT guide ranks number 12, and then security practices ranked number 22. I'm just being funny. It's probably much more widely applicable for other people throughout the DBT community.
Cool. Miles, you're next.
Great, thanks. Tristan, I attended the user conference back in December, and one of the cool things about that conference was when they showed the growth of DBT projects over time. And just, I think maybe the first year was maybe 2016. You can just kind of see the hockey stick growth, especially in the last couple of years. I actually started using DBT back in 2018. And one of the things back then that is still true today that I really appreciate is how just the feel of community. And my question to you was about how you've been able to, DBT Labs has been able to kind of maintain the similar community feel from 2018 when I first joined to now when you've had all this growth. This is kind of touching back to something you talked about a couple of minutes ago, but I was just curious to hear how you think about that.
I'm happy to say some words on this. It just strikes me though that like you might have more insight into the answer to that question than I do, because your experience as a community member is like actually what is interesting here. Do you actually feel like that's true? Do you feel like the community that you joined in 2018 has much the same positive characteristics that the community does that you see today?
So from the very beginning, I noticed this, I observed the Slack group to be incredibly helpful, and it's gotten a lot bigger now. Like there are a lot more people posting in channels, like asking questions, discussing things. But like that just same attitude of asking questions, people being very generous with their time and like giving responses, like really cool collaborations being set up. That's like, those are characteristics I've noticed since the beginning and things I still see. So it's kind of goes back to what you're talking about with being like letting the community kind of decide the direction of the product is something you touched on. So yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is a struggle for me, and I don't know that there is like a solution for it, is just like how numbers work. That, 2018, the community was still reasonably small, but let me tell you, in 2016, it was like 5 of us sitting around the kitchen table or something. Not that extreme, but like, you kind of knew everybody. And that was still appreciably true in 2017. And one of the things that helps with is that new members, that's not fair. Not new members, like literally everybody. When you go to ask a question in a public space, you always have this second thread going on in your brain that says like, are people going to think that this is a really dumb question? And I literally have that thread in my brain today. I just asked something about some new functionality that Snowflake launched, and I was just like, I wonder if everybody's already talked about this and I just missed it. I wonder if everyone's gonna be like, this guy's really out of touch at this point. And when you have a small community, you don't worry about that as much because you like literally know everybody, and no one's gonna judge you. Anyway, so I think that we have to like actually work really hard to overcome just the effects of those large numbers. We have I don't know what we're at, 7 people, something like 7 people on the community team, and we're going to grow that team pretty aggressively over the coming year. One of the ways that we're really trying to solve this numbers problem is kind of localizing conversations into micro communities, as opposed to just like, this is the beginners channel. It has 25,000 people in it. And, you know, if you ask a question, you have to, that question is going to be seen by 25,000 people. Instead to like, you know, whether it's by location or interest area, like, you know, there's I forget the channel name, but there's a data team leaders channel now for people to talk about their struggles there. There's database communities. There's all these like different micro communities, and we do a lot of analytics to figure out which of these micro communities are healthy or which ones need some love. But I think that as of right now, the DBT community really is, or at least the Slack part of the DBT community is more appropriately seen as, you know, on any given week between 15 and 25 different micro communities. Anyway, all this is to say that like, I think that the problem of scaling community is very hard. It's not impossible. And I think that we almost have to think about it like an anthropological problem, more so than like software, where like literally we have conversations about like, how do humans productively interact with one another, and how can we like nudge the interactions in that direction?
Thanks for that. Brian, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I do have another question around, you know, we are a DevOps company, and can you tell us a little bit of your thoughts on the data space and either how it has or it needs to embrace a DevOps mindset and the benefits of that?
I can. It's funny, when we said that in 2016, so I published this blog post that essentially became the vision for the company and you know, for what we're trying to do in the world. I published this in 2016, and the central thesis was data people needed to work more like software engineers, and a big part of that, although I don't think I used the term DevOps in this post, a big part of that was essentially, you know, DevOps related workflows. That did not resonate with the data industry of 2016. Like, I can't even tell you how much people didn't care about that perspective then. And since then, it's almost accepted wisdom that like that is how things should work. But the word in that sentence that's doing the most work is should. I think that people see that as almost an idealistic, like, okay, DBT has like carved out a part of the data workflow that does lend, you know, now we've brought the data transformation workflow into the DevOps world. But, you know, if you look at ingestion, if you look at any of the, well, almost any of the different analytics layers, these parts of the workflow are not, do not really allow themselves to be thought of in the DevOps workflow really at all. And so I think that while practitioners would like to push that further, most of our tools don't really encourage that today. I don't want to like call out anybody specifically, but like if you think of the BI tools that you spend time with, like most of them do not support, you do not think of them as like code first experiences or submitting to pull request, merge request processes very effectively. You don't think of, you know, any of these like classically DevOps things. But there are companies being started today to like rebuild those layers as well in a more of a DevOps workflow. So I'm hopeful. Like here's the way that I'd like to see this work. I'd love for there to be, you know, a single repo or a series of repos that like span the entire analytic journey at a given company. And if you want to release a new feature, and that new feature involves data ingestion and transformation and analysis, that like that is one or a set of merge requests, and you approve those, you merge those, and like literally all of it just happens. Now we don't have the ability to control that ourselves, but like I would love to play nicely in that environment. It's like really silly, right? I mean, we're like far behind on this, and software engineers figured this stuff out a while ago, and data people are still playing catch up.
Yeah, we have like 1 minute left, but I'm going to ask just a quick follow-up question because you talked about the tools not being there today. But you know, from a data thought leadership point of view, do you feel that the industry is truly embracing and developing those tools to allow for this? And if they're not, I would imagine there's some disruption that's still very available for
Yes.
new startups.
I think that's totally true. Keeping this short, I think that my sense is that data leaders at large organizations want that to be true, but they don't see a path between like where they are now and that actually becoming true. And partially that's a like training problem, because maybe data transformation is done by more technical folks and data analysis is done by classically less technical folks. And so maybe there's a skills gap there to actually do things more in a data ops fashion. I'm personally a believer that like that the market will move in that direction from a human capital perspective. And I think that the tools will be built too, but you're right. We're not there.
Tristan, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know it was a big commitment and it was very appreciated. I hope that you found it as, you know, stimulating as we all did. So thank you very much.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks, folks. It's been fun.